The slap landed like a gunshot. 1 second, the cafe was full of ordinary Saturday morning noise, the hiss of the espresso machine, silverware against ceramic, a dozen overlapping conversations. The next second, every sound in the room stopped at once. Victoria Hale's open palm had connected with the left side of a black single dad's face, hard enough that the people nearest them visibly flinched. A woman at the counter dropped her cup. A child at the window table went completely still. The man did not move. He stood there with his daughter pressed against his chest, one large hand curved protectively around the back of her head, as if shielding her from something far worse than a slap. He did not stagger. He did not raise his voice. He simply turned his head back, slowly, deliberately, and looked at Victoria with eyes so calm and so empty of surprise that several people in that cafe later said it was the most unsettling thing they had ever witnessed. Then her bodyguard stepped forward to do his job. He got within 3 feet of the man, looked at the scar running down the left side of his face, and stopped. The color drained out of him completely. He took 1 step back. Daniel Reeves woke at 6:15 every Saturday morning without setting an alarm. It wasn't a habit he had chosen so much as one his body refused to release. 16 years out of the army, and he still couldn't sleep past dawn. He had stopped fighting it years ago. He would make coffee, sit at the kitchen table in the quiet, and let the apartment settle around him before the day demanded anything of him. By 7, his daughter Maya would be awake. He always knew the precise moment because the entire apartment registered it. A small seismic event announced by feet hitting the floor, a drawer opening and closing twice, and then her appearance in the kitchen doorway in mismatched socks with an expression of total seriousness. "Is it park day?" she would ask. The same way she asked every Saturday. "It's park day," he would answer, the same way he answered every Saturday. She allowed herself exactly 1 second of visible excitement before disappearing back into her room to get dressed. Daniel was not a complicated man to look at. Tall, broad through the shoulders, somewhere in his early 40s, with close-cropped hair and a face that had been weathered rather than aged. He wore plain clothes and owned nothing that cost more than it needed to. He drove a used truck and lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a decent part of the city, and he worked 3 days a week as a logistics consultant for a regional shipping company, enough to keep the lights on and to be home whenever Maya needed him to be. The scar ran from his left temple down along the curve of his jaw, a long pale ridge of healed tissue that pulled slightly at the corner of his eye when he smiled. People noticed it. They always did. Some asked. Most didn't. He never explained it to anyone, and he had learned long ago that silence itself was usually enough to make people stop asking. By 8:30, they were walking through the door of a cafe called Birchwood on the corner of 5th and Lindell, their standing Saturday stop before the park, a tradition that had started the winter after his wife died and had not been broken once in 3 years. Maya held his hand and told him about a drawing she had made at school of a horse that she admitted looked more like a dog. Daniel listened to every word the way he always did, with the full and undivided attention of a man who understood exactly how limited his time with these mornings actually was. Birchwood was busy in the particular way Saturday mornings made it busy. Every table occupied, a line stretching back from the counter, the smell of fresh bread mixing with dark roast. Daniel ordered his usual black coffee and Maya's usual hot chocolate, found a small table near the window, and for a few minutes, everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. Maya was mid-sentence about the horse that looked like a dog when she slid off her chair to point at something on the chalkboard menu above the counter. She turned too fast. The hot chocolate went first, tilting out of her small hand in a slow, inevitable arc that Daniel was a half-second too late to catch. It hit the floor and splashed upward in a wide fan, and a significant portion of it landed across the shoes of the woman standing directly behind her. The woman was Victoria Hale. Daniel didn't recognize her by name in that moment, but the city did, in the low-level ambient way that came from being one of the most prominent executives in the region's financial sector. She was in her mid-40s, dressed in a manner that made the inside of the cafe look slightly underdressed by comparison, and she had been holding a phone to her ear when the hot chocolate hit her shoes. She looked down. She looked at Maya, who was still on the floor where she had stumbled, looking up with wide eyes already filling with tears, the unmistakable expression of a child who knows something has gone wrong and is bracing to find out exactly how bad it is going to be. Victoria ended her call. "What is wrong with you?" Her voice was not loud. It was worse than loud, precise, deliberate, each word placed for maximum effect. Do you have any idea what you just did? Look at these shoes. Do you even know what these cost? Where are your parents? Who lets a child run around a public place like this? Maya started to cry. Daniel was out of his chair before Victoria finished her second sentence. He crossed the space in 4 steps, crouched beside his daughter, and wrapped one arm around her without looking away from the floor, checking her knees, her hands, making sure she hadn't hit anything when she fell. She hadn't. He pulled her gently upright, kept one hand on her shoulder, and rose to his full height to look at Victoria for the first time. "She's 8 years old," he said. She tripped. "Are you hurt?" The question was directed at Maya, not at Victoria. Maya shook her head, pressing her face into his side. "Then we're going to get you cleaned up," he said quietly to his daughter. He looked back at Victoria. "I'll pay for the cleaning. I'd like you to apologize to my daughter." The cafe had gone noticeably quieter. Not silent yet, but the nearest conversations had thinned in that particular way that happens when people pretend not to listen, while listening very carefully. Victoria looked at him the way a person looks at something they have nearly stepped in. "Apologize," she repeated. The word came out flat, faintly amused, as though he had said something genuinely absurd. "Your daughter just ruined a pair of shoes that cost more than you probably make in a month. I'm not going to apologize for pointing that out." "She's a child," Daniel said. "She made a mistake. That's different from doing something wrong. I don't need a lesson in child development." "You want to do something useful," Daniel said, his voice level. "Take your daughter home and teach her how to behave in public." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move closer. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Please apologize to my daughter." Something tightened in Victoria's expression, a small elevation of the chin, the look of someone who had not been spoken to this way in a very long time and found the experience genuinely offensive. "You have no idea who you're talking to," she said, her voice dropping half a register. "I have personal relationships with 3 members of the city council, the deputy chief of police, and 2 sitting judges. I make one phone call, and you won't just lose this argument, you'll lose custody of that child before the end of the week." Child Services takes anonymous tips very seriously, especially from credible sources. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Maya heard them. Daniel felt her go rigid against his side, felt her small fingers find his hand and grip it with both of hers. She looked up at him with pure, uncomplicated fear. He looked down at her. He thought about the drive home, about the park 3 blocks away, about every version of this moment that ended with him walking quietly out the door and teaching his daughter, without meaning to, that there were people in the world whose anger you simply had to absorb. He looked back at Victoria. He didn't move. Victoria made the call first. She stepped back half a pace, pulled out her phone with the practiced ease of someone who had ended arguments this way before, and spoke to whoever answered in a clipped, businesslike tone that made clear she was not asking for help, she was issuing instructions. Daniel heard the words attorney and harassment and documentation before she lowered her voice deliberately, turning slightly away as though the conversation were private, despite the fact that everyone within 15 feet could hear every word. She ended the call and looked at him with something close to satisfaction. "My attorney will be here in 20 minutes, she said. "I'd suggest you sit back down." Daniel didn't sit down. "You can also expect a call from someone at Child Services within the hour," she continued, slipping her phone back into her bag. "I have a contact there, very thorough, especially when there are concerns about a child's home environment." At the counter, 2 staff members had stopped pretending to work. The manager, a heavy-set man in his 40s, had appeared from the back and was hovering near the register, visibly calculating the least damaging way to intervene with someone who tipped generously and came in 4 times a week. He didn't intervene. At the tables nearest the window, 3 customers had their phones out. One was already filming. Daniel stood exactly where he had been standing. "You done?" he asked. Victoria blinked, a small reaction, barely visible, but there. She had expected several responses to what she had just said. That particular one was not among them. "I beg your pardon. You made your calls," Daniel said. "You said what you wanted to say. I'm still here. My daughter is still here, and I'm still asking you to apologize to her." The room was quiet enough now that the espresso machine sounded almost aggressive. Victoria looked at him for a long moment, really looked, the way a person examines a structural problem they can't immediately locate the source of. Then something hardened behind her eyes, and she took one slow step forward. The slap came without warning. One moment Victoria stood in front of him, expression locked into something cold and absolute. The next, her right hand swung in a sharp open arc and connected with the left side of Daniel's face with a crack that cut through every remaining sound in the room like a blade. The cafe went completely silent. Not the partial, uncertain quiet of before. Complete silence, the kind that falls when something happens that no one present knows how to process. Someone near the counter exhaled audibly. A child at the table by the window started crying, not because anything had happened to her, but because the sound alone had frightened her. Maya did not cry. She went completely still, her arms wrapped around her father's waist, her face turning upward with an expression that was not fear and not confusion, but something closer to waiting, as though she already understood, beneath words, that what happened in the next few seconds mattered more than anything that had come before. Daniel did not stagger. He did not raise his hands. The force of the blow had turned his head to the right, and he brought it back slowly, not with the speed of anger, but with the deliberate, unhurried movement of a man who had decided in advance exactly how he would respond to this, and was simply executing that decision. He looked at Victoria with eyes that held no fury, no wounded pride, no shock, just a stillness, so absolute it seemed to come from somewhere far deeper than the present moment. From the door, Bradley moved. He was a big man, 6'2", thick through the chest and shoulders, mid-50s, with the physical economy that came from a lifetime of professional discipline. He had worked private security for 12 years, the last 4 for Victoria, and he was very good at his job. He crossed the cafe floor in long, measured strides, positioned himself between his employer and Daniel, and prepared to do exactly what he was paid to do. Then he looked at Daniel's face. The scar ran from the left temple down along the jaw, in a long, pale curve, the specific irregular shape left by fragmented metal traveling at high velocity, the kind of wound that didn't come from an accident or a street fight, but from a very particular category of violence that Bradley understood from personal experience. He had last seen that scar on the night of October 9, 2008, in a collapsing building outside Kandahar, when the man wearing it had come back through a burning doorway for the second time to pull Bradley out by his vest, while his own face was actively bleeding onto the floor. Bradley stopped. The professional momentum that had carried him across the room simply stopped. He stood 3 feet from Daniel and did not move. The color went out of his face in a single visible wave. His mouth opened slightly. For several seconds, he said nothing at all, and the silence around him was so complete that when he finally exhaled, people 2 tables away heard it. He took 1 step back. "I can't," he said. His voice came out uneven, barely above a murmur, but the room was quiet enough that it carried. He turned to look at Victoria, and his expression was something she had never seen on him before. "I can't do this. Not to this man." "What are you talking about?" Victoria said. Bradley didn't answer her. He was still looking at Daniel. "Special Forces," he said. 2nd Battalion, October 9, 2008. The words came out quietly, but something in the way he said them made Victoria stop mid-sentence. "There was a building," Bradley continued, speaking now to the room as much as to her. "A compound on the eastern edge of the city. We were there for an extraction, classified operation, 6-man team. The compound had been booby-trapped. We didn't know until the first device went off." He paused. His jaw worked for a moment. 3 of us got out clean. 2 were confirmed down. I was trapped on the 2nd floor, ceiling partially collapsed, both exits blocked, the whole structure burning around me. Maybe 4 minutes before the smoke alone killed me." He stopped again. He came back in the first time and got Davies out. Davies had a broken leg, couldn't move on his own. He carried him out over his shoulder, through a doorway that was already on fire. Several people near the counter had stopped pretending to look elsewhere. "Then he went back in," Bradley said, "for me. The building was coming down. Davies was out. The mission was technically complete. Any reasonable person would have called it done. He went back anyway. The 2nd device detonated while he was on the stairs. That's where the scar came from. Fragmentation. He was still moving when it went off. He got to me, got me to the window, got me out." He exhaled slowly. "I never saw him again after that night. His records got pulled into a classification level I didn't have clearance for. I didn't even know his name until 6 months later." "This is absurd," Victoria said. Her voice had lost some of its precision. Not much, but enough to be audible. This is completely absurd. You're standing here telling me this man is some kind of... I'm telling you what I know, Bradley said. I'm telling you what I saw. You could be making this up. He could have put you up to this. I don't know this man, ma'am. Bradley finally turned to look at her directly. His expression was not angry. It was something quieter and more final than anger. I have the medical records. I have the incident report. I have a scar on my left side that matches the exit point of the same device that did that to his face. He paused. I'm not making anything up. Victoria opened her mouth. Then she closed it. For the first time since she had walked into the cafe that morning, she had nothing to say. The video had been recording for 11 minutes. A woman named Carla, seated at the table directly behind Victoria, had started filming the moment the hot chocolate hit the floor. She had filmed the argument, the threats, the slap, Bradley's approach, and every word of what he had just said. She had also, without fully deciding to, already uploaded it to 3 separate platforms before Bradley finished his last sentence. The first notification appeared on someone's phone 40 seconds later, then another, then 6 more in rapid succession from different tables, different devices, a cascade of buzzing and chiming that meant something had already escaped the room it started in and was moving through the world on its own momentum. Victoria heard it. She looked around at the phones lighting up on tables around her, and for the first time that morning, her expression shifted into something that was not anger and not contempt, but something closer to the early stages of genuine alarm. The door opened. 2 police officers stepped in, not rushing, hands relaxed, simply walking in the measured way that responds to a staff call rather than an emergency. They surveyed the room, identified the relevant geography of people and tension, and moved toward the center of it. The older of the 2, a sergeant named Hollis, broad-faced and unhurried, looked at Daniel first, then at Bradley, then at Victoria. "We got a call from the staff," he said. "Anybody want to tell me what happened?" 3 people started talking at once. Hollis held up one hand and they stopped, one at a time. Carla stood up from her table and turned her phone around. "I have the whole thing on video," she said. "From the beginning." Hollis watched it. His partner watched it over his shoulder. The cafe was quiet enough that the thin audio from Carla's phone was audible to the nearest tables, Victoria's voice sharp and precise telling Daniel she would have his daughter taken away. Then the sound of the slap, then silence, then Bradley's voice, steady and low, explaining Kandahar. Hollis handed the phone back without expression. He looked at Victoria. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step outside with me." "I'm not going anywhere," Victoria said. "I want to file a complaint against..." "Ma'am." Hollis's voice didn't change in volume or temperature. "You're not being arrested. I'm asking you to step outside so we can take a statement and get some information from you. You're also being advised that based on the video evidence and the witness accounts in this room, you may be subject to a charge of simple assault. You are not required to say anything further until you've spoken with an attorney, which I understand is already on the way." Victoria looked at him. She looked at Bradley, standing very still with his hands at his sides and his eyes on the floor. She looked at Daniel, who was looking back at her with the same expression he had worn since the moment the slap landed. Not triumphant, not angry, simply present and immovable. She picked up her bag. She walked toward the door. Every person in the cafe watched her go. Nobody looked away. Nobody said anything. The only sound was the quiet, steady noise of her heels on the tile floor and the door swinging open into the morning light. Maya looked up at her father. "Daddy," she said quietly, "are you okay?" Daniel crouched down, wrapped both arms around her, and held her for a moment before he answered. "Yeah, baby," he said, "I'm okay." The video hit 2 million views before sundown. By midnight, it had been picked up by 4 national news outlets, shared by a veterans advocacy organization with 3 million followers, and featured in a cable news segment under a headline calling it an executive caught on camera attacking a decorated combat veteran. By Sunday morning, Daniel Reeves's name was being spoken by people who had never been to his city, in conversations he had no part in and no control over. His phone had been off since noon on Saturday. He had turned it off in the parking lot of the cafe after the police took his statement and released him, while Maya was buckled into the back seat eating a granola bar he had found in the glove compartment. He had looked at the screen, already filling with numbers he didn't recognize, and turned it off with the deliberateness of a man closing a door he had no intention of reopening soon. Then he drove to the park. They were 40 minutes late, but the park didn't care. The swings were still there. Maya ran ahead of him down the path the way she always did, arms out slightly for balance on the uneven ground, and Daniel walked behind her with his hands in his pockets and the left side of his face still faintly warm from the morning. They stayed for 2 hours. What Daniel knew, in real time, was Maya. She didn't talk about the cafe on Saturday. She didn't talk about it Sunday either, and he didn't push her. He had learned in 8 years of being her father that she processed things quietly, on her own schedule, and then all at once, when she was ready. It came Sunday night. She was already in bed, the lamp on the nightstand turned down low, when he came in to check on her. She was on her back, staring at the ceiling, with the expression she wore when something was working itself out behind her eyes. "Daddy," she said without looking at him. "Have you ever been scared?" He sat down on the edge of her bed. He thought about the question the way it deserved to be thought about. "Yeah," he said, "lots of times." She turned her head to look at him. "What did you do?" "I did what needed doing anyway," he said. "Being scared doesn't mean you stop. It just means you keep going while you're scared." She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said finally, in the tone she used when she had filed something away permanently. He turned off the lamp. He sat with her in the dark until her breathing slowed and evened out into sleep. Then he sat there a little longer. The civil hearing was scheduled 6 weeks later. Victoria arrived without a motorcade, a single car, one attorney, no bodyguard. Bradley had resigned the Monday after the cafe, a brief professional email that said nothing beyond what was necessary. When the presiding officer asked if she wished to add anything beyond her attorney's prepared statement, Victoria looked at him, then stood up anyway. "I want to say something," she said. "Not through counsel, just myself." She turned to face Daniel directly. "I watched the video," she said. "I watched it many times. I told myself the first few times that context was missing, that people didn't understand the full situation. I was lying to myself. The video showed exactly what happened. I said things to you and to your daughter that were designed to cause harm, and then I hit you, in front of your child, in front of a room full of people." She paused. "There is no version of that which is defensible. I know that. I knew it before I walked in here today." She did not look away from him. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not because I'm here and it's the appropriate thing to say, because it's true, and I don't have anything else worth saying." The room was quiet. Daniel looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once, the same way Bradley had once nodded at him in the cafe months earlier. Not forgiveness, not absolution, simply acknowledgement. The gesture of one person confirming that another's words had been received. The terms of the judgment were entered into the record. Financial restitution, a formal injunction, a permanent notation that would follow Victoria's professional history regardless of what she rebuilt or didn't rebuild afterward. Nothing was erased, nothing was forgiven in the legal sense. The costs were real and permanent, and Victoria paid them without trying to negotiate them down. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in early December, 4 months after the hearing. Daniel found it in the mailbox when he came home from picking Maya up from school. A plain white envelope, no return address, his name and apartment number written in careful, unhurried handwriting. Inside was a letter, handwritten on a single sheet of paper, and beneath it, wrapped in tissue, a small hardback coloring book filled with detailed illustrations of horses, with a set of colored pencils tucked into a sleeve on the inside cover. He recognized it immediately. 3 weeks earlier, walking past a bookstore on the way to the grocery store, Maya had stopped in front of the window display and pointed at that exact book with the focused certainty of an 8-year-old who knew precisely what she wanted. She had stood there for almost a full minute just looking at it. Daniel had made a mental note to come back. He hadn't made it back yet. The letter explained it simply. Victoria had been in that same bookstore 2 weeks after the hearing, looking for something meaningful rather than something expensive. She had asked the woman at the counter what books children loved most. The woman had mentioned a little girl who had stood outside, staring at the window display for a long time, just recently. Victoria had bought it without hesitation. Daniel stood in the hallway for a long time. Then he went inside. He set the book on the kitchen table and read the letter twice, standing up before he folded it and placed it in the drawer where he kept the things that mattered. Maya's birth certificate, his discharge papers, a photograph of his wife taken the summer before she got sick. He did not tell Maya where the book came from. When she found it on the kitchen table 20 minutes later, her reaction was everything an 8-year-old's reaction to an unexpected gift is supposed to be. Immediate, total, uncomplicated by any of the history attached to it. She climbed into her chair, opened the cover, and began examining each page with the seriousness of someone assessing a significant undertaking. "Who gave this to us?" she asked. Daniel sat down across from her. "Someone who's trying to be better," he said. Maya considered this carefully. "Are they doing okay?" "I think so," Daniel said. "I think they're working on it." Maya nodded, apparently satisfied, and turned back to her book. Daniel watched her select a pencil, burnt orange, for reasons that were entirely her own, and begin filling in the outline of a horse standing in a field. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window and fell across the table, across her hands, across the open pages. The scar on Daniel's face caught the light the way it always did, that long, pale ridge running from temple to jaw, the mark of a particular night in a burning building far from this kitchen, from this table, from this ordinary and unrepeatable afternoon. He didn't think about Kandahar. He watched his daughter draw a horse, and he thought about nothing at all. Power can make people feared, but character is what makes them remembered.